Welcome to the May 2024 edition of the Cardinals Insider Podcast. I'm Brett McMillan, joined by Joe Pfeiffer, our Director of Alumni Relations, and here with us in the room, Ricky Horton and Ken Dayley, great relievers from those great 1980s Cardinals teams. And guys, it's good to be with you. Wish it was for a different reason, but here to talk about the late, great Whitey Herzog, who passed away last month by the time that people will watch this. And just wanted to get you guys together. You threw a lot of pitches, a lot of innings for Whitey. Let's start with this. I've had a couple of people say, great players make great managers and vice versa. And I feel like that's really true with Whitey. Brilliant, had a lot of great players, but it worked both ways, I'm sure, didn't it?
Well, I get the sense that he got the best out of the teams that I was on, at least with him. And you felt like if you would have considered yourself to be a marginal player, you didn't feel that way when you came to work under Whitey. You just felt like you were important. And whether you were getting a left-hander out in the fifth inning, and that was it, if the team doesn't win unless you do your job. And so, it's interesting how, you'd always define, greatness or, effectiveness in the context of a team ultimately. And it just worked with him because he knew exactly what he was doing all the time.
What about for you, Ken? You threw a lot of innings, and something that I was thinking about with both you guys, thinking we were going to sit down with a pair of relievers, is bullpen usage and the way that Whitey would do it. For you guys, how did carving out your role and the way that he did that help?
Well, we kind of had that bullpen by committee at the time that he called it, and so he would talk to us on a daily basis. If you went 1 or 2 the day before, he'd say, "Hey, can you get me an out? Can you give me an inning?" So he would talk to you, and you kind of knew beforehand what to expect, because if I had pitched a couple innings late, then I might get one hitter earlier in the game in the 7th or something, and Rick would pitch later. So. The door was open with Whitey, and he was a great communicator, and he would be the one to tell you that he always said, good players make great managers.
Well, Ken and I were both, just to that point, Ken and I were both starters in the minor leagues. So I'd actually never relieved till the big leagues. You probably hadn't either, Ken, I wouldn't think.
I have a good quote for that, too.
Oh, you do? Hold that thought. But so we had to kind of learn on the fly. But, part of what I think he was always looking for in relievers is people that could go multiple innings. I think the way he wanted to manage this mix and match kind of thing, the bullpen by committee, which I still think he is the first one to create that phrase, and it is, several people say that he did. Others may have used the bullpen similarly, but that was his concept, I think. But the point is, he had a method to that, and it would work if he had guys who number one could go long distance out of the bullpen, but number 2 could pitch the next day too. And so your ability to be able to come back was actually an ability I think he looked for.
That tactical mindset was with him till the very end. For those of us who got to listen to him, it was there.
Yeah, I as you mentioned, Rick, when I got traded over here for Kenny Oberkfeld, Mike Jorgensen, and myself, I was a starter, and I made 2 starts, of which the first time I saw you pitch was almost a no-hitter in San Diego. Yeah. But anyhow, I made my second start and got sent to AAA, and in the St. Louis Dispatch here, Whitey was quoted as saying, "When Dayley pitches, I got to keep the married men off the field," and I don't think that's a plus. I'm not sure.
You may have meant that as a compliment, but I don't know. With Whitey, you always knew you were going to get the truth from him, for sure.
Oh yeah, he wasn't afraid to let you know what he was thinking.
That was the truth at Fantasy Camp when I've seen him with you too, Joe. I mean, he was always unfiltered in a wonderful way about baseball and life, and I know that he meant a lot to you guys with what you were doing.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to even imagine doing what we do without him, quite frankly. But he loved it. He didn't want to miss a fantasy camp. He got pure joy from going there. And he'd remember those campers and how bad they were. And we used to do a funny award. Whitey would want to pick out the worst player in camp. And, he'd stand up there in the last day of camp and say, I've got this narrowed down to about 55 of you. And it just had a way of really engaging every fantasy camper. I hear from the campers all the time that their favorite moments are the breakfast in the multi-purpose room at Roger Dean Stadium and just talking with Whitey. He was so easy to talk to, and he engaged everybody. And just, I don't know that we'll ever have an ambassador quite at his level again in this organization, because he just lived and breathed it, not only from the days when he managed these guys, and I loved it when he would call these guys his ball players. I always got a treat out of that. But he followed this team right up to last season and knew it inside and out. and just loved the game and loved sports in general. I mean, you could talk college basketball with him, you could talk Blues hockey with him, and you could talk family with him. Family was very important to him. He made these guys and their spouses feel like family, which is a really special skill in a manager. He was just the kind of the perfect guy for St. Louis, I think.
And Brett, I would say that I heard from at least a dozen fantasy campers after Whitey passed, and I heard from former teammates. We were on text chains and kind of sharing our personal moments. But I had some personal moments with fantasy campers too, and talking about those moments that you just said, Joe, over lunch. And my impression of the fantasy campers when they would meet Whitey is they would be afraid to talk to him at first, their first camp, because he was baseball royalty. And then after about 2 minutes, they'd think, why was I afraid to talk to this guy? Because he was so down to earth and so easy to have a conversation with. Now, he would talk most of it. I mean, that's that. Whitey was a talker, but he was a great storyteller and remembered details of games and was really kind of deep, rich conversation with our campers.
If you had to handicap why he was a great manager, and not having had the privilege of watching him manage in person, I have to imagine a lot of it was how he dealt with people. For as much as we talk about numbers today, and numbers have always been important in baseball, it's a people business. And what everybody's just said, I mean, it seems like he's maybe one of the best ever connecting with human beings.
Whitey actually kind of was into the analytics back then. He had his colored pencils for each different pitcher, had a different color, and he kept track of where balls were hit, and so he was, along that line. But he just, he also managed with his gut, and he knew that if a guy was swinging the bat well, that he wanted to get him in there, and if a guy came up from the minor leagues, he wanted to get him in right away to get his feet wet so that he could settle in, and he was a good communicator and a great guy to play for.
Somewhere along the line, I learned that you manage things and you lead people, and I think he was good at both things. Managing the game, he would always be a step ahead, and a number of times Ken and I would have conversations about what's Whitey doing. I mean, now I get it. I mean, we would all have that. In fact, a lot of the players on that team coached somewhere along the line because I think they learned the game pretty quickly by being around Whitey. But you manage things, but you lead people, and the ideas that Ken was saying there of just understanding kind of the psyche of a player, how to kind of boost him and give him confidence and test him a little bit, and all of that was part of the leading people part. And honestly, his idea with us is you're going to be a pro. I expect you to be a pro and do things right. And if you're not, we'll get somebody else to do that. I mean, he didn't have a lot of rules.
He had three, right?
He had 3 rules. The 3 rules. My very first spring training, he said, I have 3 rules. It's the shortest meeting ever, 2-minute meeting. He said, okay, I want you to play hard. I want you to run everything out. So be on time and play hard. Those were really the 2 things. And then the third thing was, if you get thrown in jail, call me first. and I thought that was interesting. I wasn't planning on needing that one, but it was just good to know.
Good advice.
Yeah, I'm glad you never needed it.
No, I didn't. You probably some people called him along the way, but I can imagine.
Those spray charts you were talking about, Ken, those are infamous. Dave Duncan did something similar to kind of an era removed. But what did that mean to you guys tactically? Again, because the game has changed a lot, but much of it's the same. The mound's still 60 feet 6 inches. Being able to have that look, how did that give Cardinal teams an edge?
Well, I mean, back then the USA Today was kind of the paper that we looked at, but when teams were going to come in, you kind of started looking at players and seeing how they were swinging the bat, and if they were going good at the time, you had to pitch them a little more careful. But you could also go to Whitey's charts and say what happened with this guy or that guy. You kind of know out of the bullpen, you kind of know the 3 or 4 guys that you're going to come in and face, and then who was going to come off the bench if you don't face them. But you could see if you'd faced them before where they'd hit the ball, and so it gave you a little insight if you don't remember, which there's a lot of base hits I remember. So that's the good news and the bad news, I guess.
Go ahead.
And the starting pitcher would be in charge of some of the input of that. Think about you're watching a game on TV now, and there's a Fox box, and you kind of go, well, that's a fastball up and away, or you have all that. Well, whoever was starting the next day was in charge of determining via the gun that you were actually holding. That you had to not a scout. You had to have we had our own gun. You're holding the gun, and it's okay. That was 92. 92 was a fastball low and away. You had to write every pitch FLA, fastball low and away. And if it was a foul ball, FLA, F for a foul ball. So you're literally being the Fox box for your team, and so that information was available for Whitey. He would kind of go through that and set the defense too. Now again, not electronically, not with an algorithm. Right. The algorithm was in the head of Whitey Herzog, which to me, that's a pretty good algorithm place. He was very, very sharp.
I think one of the coolest artifacts I've seen in Cooperstown, it was the last fantasy camp we did up there. A lot of times they'll bring Cardinals items for our group out of the archives. And it was Bruce Suter's spray chart versus Ryan Sandberg that Whitey had done, the color coded that you're talking about.
Yeah, everybody got a color.
It looked like something that would be printed today off of, whether it's an iPad or a computer or whatever the guys are using right now. But Whitey, speaking of that, I mean, just his mind, he knew, and he and Bruce would have conversations going into those games against Rhino and how we wanted to pitch him. And the mind was just so amazing and just so advanced. A lot of times, I think a lot of, we know it in St. Louis, but I think it's underrated nationwide, the impact that Whitey Herzog had on the game of baseball. Because I tell you, to this day, I think the 1985 Cardinals could beat anybody that's ever played in the history of baseball, one-on-one.
Another point on Whitey, the year that they cut the roster from 25 to 24, he came out to the outfield during spring training that year, and he said, Todd and I were standing there, and he said, I want you guys to take balls off the bats. He said, don't break an arm or a leg out here. He said, but just get used to taking it. He said, because they took my extra guy off the bench, and sometime this year I'm going to bring one of you in and then put you in right field while the other one pitches, and then take him out and put you back on the mound. And so we were like, yeah, okay, Brett. And sure enough, it happened against the Dodgers. And I remember Tommy Lasorda flipping a wig. Boy, I mean, he didn't want to give Todd the warm-up pitches the second time back in, and he delayed the game probably 20 or 25 minutes. Todd could have threw 100 pitches. And so, but Whitey was thinking of that in spring training because the way he played and used his bench, he knew that was going to affect his game, and he wanted to find a way where he could get by without using another player.
When he had trust in you guys that it was going to work out, even if a ball gets hit that way. You mentioned trust earlier, and that's something that comes up a lot with Whitey. What does that mean to a player when he comes in, he's young, and it's, hey, my expectation is you're going to do well. That's what I expect to see. And so how does that empower you to then go out and get people out?
Well, it really does. I mean, your manager believes in you. I mean, I always say that when Whitey actually picked me to be on the big league roster for the first time, and it's like, okay, well, that's Whitey Herzog, and the club 2 years prior had just won the World Series, so I knew of his reputation already and hadn't been around him a lot, but it's like, okay, he thinks I'm worthy than I think I'm. I mean, it just gets imputed to you that look, this guy really knows the game, and that's going to give me some confidence. And he would do that in situations. He would also do that by taking the thinking away from you in a lot of ways. I mean, I could think of times where he came out to the mound to take me out after not so good of a game, and he'd say, when I was starting, because I did some of that, spot starting, and he'd come out and say, okay, so you're going to throw on the side on Tuesday, you're going to pitch Friday in New York against Gooden. And so he already had that mapped out. So he had the ability, while he's taking me out of a game, to go to the immediate next and give me confidence that I'm still part of the team here. It wasn't like he was feeling sorry for me. It wasn't that. It's like, nope, okay, that happened. Let's forget it and move on. And he would just be very clear about things. Every time I went to bunt, okay, I never had a signal. He said, I don't need a signal with you. You just bunt until you're out. That's what he told me. So he took the thinking away. I didn't have to learn the signals. All I just knew is, okay, he knew I couldn't hit, so I'm just going to just bunt. If I'm out, I'm out.
He had this beautiful way of being so intelligent but comedic at the
Yes,
same time. I mean, how he
100%.
told you made the big leagues.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. Well, he kind of forgot to tell me he made the big leagues. I mean, I didn't know at a spring training. He actually sent one of the coaches to tell me. Again, the mark of a great leader. He used his coaches very well. I talk mostly about baseball with Dave Ricketts and Mike Rourke, who is our bullpen coach and our pitching coach. They're the ones that would talk the X's and O's with me. But the last day of spring training, never been in the big leagues, trying to make the team out of spring training. Hal Lanier pulled me into a dark bat room in St. Petersburg, Florida, and said, Whitey wanted me to tell you that if you pitch well today, you make the team, and if you don't, you won't. And he said he thought you'd want to know that, and he also thought that if you can't handle knowing that and pitching well, then you probably shouldn't be there anyway. And that was the whole meeting with Hal Lanier, a guy that I knew. So he sent the messenger of a guy that I'd played for in winter ball, so that helped. But, he got his point across. There's no question about it. And then, so I pitched well, but so did the other guys, so I wasn't sure if I made the team. I had to walk into his office to find out, and Van Slyke told me, he said, just go ask the rat, ask him if he made the team. I said, okay, I will. I guess that's how it works. So I walk into his office, and he comes around the corner, fresh out of the shower, wearing nothing, and I said, hey, Whitey, I just want to know if I made the team. He said, yep. I said, okay, and I ran right out. So that's my moment that I've been waiting for my whole life, having Whitey tell me.
To see Whitey with no clothes on?
To see Whitey with no clothes on. Yeah, it's a different kind of experience than I would have imagined, but still important to me.
that's awesome.
Ken, your joining the team was different, coming over in a trade. What do you remember about that first interaction with Whitey?
Well, he called me in the office and said, we traded for you, and we expect good things, and, you just want you to go out there and pitch your game and do your thing. And like I said, it didn't go so well the first couple starts, but, the next year out of spring training, Willie pulled a hamstring, and he took an extra pitcher. Andy Hassler and myself were considered the bubble guys, and so anyhow, we both actually pitched well the first month, but he went with me, and Andy got released, and that ended up going to the World Series that year. So it was quite a time for me, and finally getting to the big leagues and getting it done was a good success for me.
Ken is an example of what I'm going to say. Whitey was an outstanding evaluator of talent, and he had been a scout, he'd been a coach, he'd been a lot of different things in the game. So he knew that Ken could be as good as Ken was, one of the best relievers that we've had in postseason in Cardinal history. And I mean, his numbers are phenomenal if you look them up. And we didn't have several rounds of playoffs, so you had to get it done right away or you go home. And Ken had some just phenomenal moments. And Whitey kind of saw that in him, and he was pretty decisive about that. He wasn't kind of waffle about you, and it didn't really matter what other people thought. If he liked you and he knew that you could pitch, he would find a spot for you, and he did that with Todd Worrell too. Ken was a good starter, a really good starter, number one pick in the minor leagues. Todd was a number one pick who was struggling as a starter, struggling in the minor leagues. But Whitey saw the same thing in both those guys, that they could pitch late in games and have closer type stuff, and it worked.
The Hall of Fame, when they put out their release just saying their condolences, just like the Cardinals had, there was 3 quotes, and one of them said, and I forget who it was, I'm kicking myself, but it was another giant of the game saying, best talent evaluator I ever saw. For those of us who are maybe not as able to see the X's and O's as those of you who played Major League Baseball, I know Whitey was a savant. I know that just about anybody on a 26-man roster or in a clubhouse that's wearing a uniform is a savant in a way that I could never see the game. Kind of handicap for us, what is that baseball IQ with him? What made it different? What gave him the ability to kind of peer a week or a month down the line and see the game maybe in a different way?
Well, you could just watch Whitey's mind working during the game, and you could almost see, after playing for him for a while, you could almost see what he's got in mind for the 7th, 8th, and 9th, how it's already going to work out. And then, of course, if something was to go awry or whatever, then he'd change things. But you could watch him just manipulate everything, and it was it was great to see. And you never had to worry about Whitey getting outmanaged.
Right.
It was never an option even. I think there was one time in my whole career here, 6 years, that he said I may have screwed that up or something, but I mean, geez.
He was probably wrong about that.
You got a chance every night to screw it up, and he just never did it.
Yeah, no, and just phenomenally prepared, and he also was focused, did not like distractions. You hear players say that now. That's kind of a buzzword everybody says. They don't like distractions, and this is not probably an appropriate thing to say because we use players so much now to sell the game. But back then, Whitey didn't want us doing anything outside of playing baseball. He said your contract says you have to do 2 appearances during the year. You're doing them the first week, and everything else I want you to be home. I want you to be playing baseball and fishing and golfing, and so he didn't want you to be uptight. He just didn't want you to be distracted by anything outside. I mean, to imagine Whitey managing a team, unfortunately, when there's social media, which is what we're, obviously we're all involved in, that would be hard to figure out because in his mind, he wanted you to be so isolated from anything other than just thinking about baseball and then the things that you love to do that relaxed you. And that would be how I would define his where he got his genius from is he was singularly focused.
I think KMOX, it's a game night, so KMOX needs to jump in here soon. So let's end on this. He went to bat for you guys a whole lot, for his guys on the Red Ribbon Committee, too, that were looking to be Red Jacket guys. I mean, to the very end, he was about his players. What did it mean to you two in 2010 when he stood on that stage in Cooperstown and he got the recognition he deserved?
Well, it was very cool. It was well-deserved. I think anybody that ever played for him, he's hands down the best manager they ever played for. He just was a great guy, and like I said, his door was open. If whether you were having a family problem or a sickness or whatever, he expected you to come in and tell him so he could make adjustments, and he wanted to get the best out of you too. So, it was a great honor to get to play for him, and a privilege for me to say that he said good players make good managers. It gave us a little edge, I guess.
I've been to the Hall of Fame twice, once as a kid and the second time for Whitey's induction, and I'll never forget that. I mean, I was honored that he had me there, that I had a chance to be there. It worked out to be there, and it was just magical for me and well-deserved, and I think anybody that ever watched the Cardinals play under Whitey Herzog would agree.
He had a wonderful, magical baseball life. Guys, thanks so much for joining us and giving us a picture of who Whitey was as a manager and as a friend. If you enjoyed this conversation, check out others like it anywhere that you get podcasts or on YouTube. We're out on the first of each month throughout the baseball season. For everybody involved, I'm Brett. This has been the Cardinals Insider Podcast.